Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's surprising topic, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our content. Today, we're exploring something you've probably never thought about, but that completely transformed human civilization: the humble shipping container. Yes, those big metal boxes you see on trucks and ships. This simple invention might be the most important innovation of the modern era, more impactful than the internet, smartphones, or space travel. It revolutionized global trade, made products incredibly cheap, reshaped cities and economies, and fundamentally changed how the world works. Drop a comment below telling me if you've ever thought about how the products you own traveled to reach you. Now let's discover why this boring-looking box is actually one of humanity's most revolutionary inventions. To understand the shipping container's revolutionary impact, we must first understand the chaotic world of shipping that existed before it. The pre-container era was shockingly inefficient, expensive, and slow, limiting global trade and making many products unaffordably expensive. Before containers, cargo was break bulk, individual items loaded piece by piece onto ships. Longshoremen carried sacks, crates, barrels, and boxes aboard ships through hatches, stacking them carefully in holds. This process was incredibly labor-intensive and time-consuming. Loading or unloading a ship could take weeks with hundreds of workers. The cost of shipping was astronomical. Moving goods from factory to customer often cost more than manufacturing them. Shipping costs could represent 25% or more of product prices. This made international trade economically viable only for high-value goods. Ordinary products were produced and consumed locally because shipping them internationally was too expensive. Theft and damage were rampant. With cargo exposed during loading and unloading, opportunities for theft were endless. Longshoremen could easily pilfer valuable items. Cargo often arrived damaged from rough handling, exposure to weather, or poor stacking. Insurance costs were high because losses were so common. Ships spent more time in port than at sea. A cargo ship might spend weeks at each port loading and unloading, but only days traveling between ports. This was economically absurd. Expensive ships and crews sat idle most of the time. The slow turnaround times meant more ships were needed to maintain trade flows, driving up costs further. Ports were labor-intensive operations requiring thousands of longshoremen. Major ports employed tens of thousands of longshoremen. This created powerful labor unions that controlled port operations. Strikes could shut down trade completely. The labor bottleneck limited how much cargo could flow through ports regardless of demand. Different modes of transportation couldn't coordinate. Cargo might travel by truck to a port, be loaded onto a ship, unloaded at destination, and loaded onto trains. Each transfer required separate handling, unpacking from one vehicle, storing temporarily, and loading onto another. These multiple handlings multiplied costs, delays, and damage risks. International trade was limited and expensive. Only wealthy countries could afford extensive international trade. Consumers in most countries bought locally produced goods because imports were too expensive. Global supply chains didn't exist because coordinating production across countries was too costly and unreliable. Trade represented a much smaller percentage of global GDP than today. Understanding pre-container shipping reveals just how revolutionary the container would be. The system was so inefficient that massive improvements were possible. One innovation could transform everything, and that's exactly what happened. The shipping container was invented by Malcolm McLean, an American trucking entrepreneur, in 1956. His innovation was brilliantly simple: standardize cargo into uniform boxes that could be transferred between ships, trucks, and trains without unpacking. This simple idea transformed global commerce more profoundly than almost any other modern innovation. The first container ship, the Ideal X, sailed from Newark to Houston in 1956, carrying 58 containers. This voyage demonstrated that containerization could reduce shipping costs by over 90% compared to breakbulk. Loading the ideal X took hours instead of days. The economic advantages were immediately obvious. Standardization was the key innovation. Eventually, standard sizes were established, primarily the 20-foot and 40-foot containers that dominate today. Standardization meant the same container could go on any ship, truck, or train equipped to handle it. This intermodal capability was revolutionary. Loading efficiency improved dramatically. Specialized cranes could load or unload an entire container in minutes. A modern container ship carrying thousands of containers can be completely unloaded and reloaded in 24 to 48 hours, a process that would have taken months in the breakbulk era. Ships spend far more time at sea and less in port, dramatically improving economics. Labor requirements plummeted. Where thousands of longshoremen once worked each port, containers could be handled by dozens of crane operators and a few support workers. This destroyed traditional dock worker jobs and unions, but made shipping vastly more efficient. The labor bottleneck that had limited trade disappeared. Theft and damage fell dramatically. Sealed containers protected cargo from theft and weather. Goods traveled from factory to destination without exposure or handling. Damage rates fell, insurance costs declined, and reliability improved. Manufacturers could ship fragile or valuable goods internationally that previously couldn't withstand the journey. Intermodal transportation became seamless. A container could be loaded at a factory in China, trucked to a port, placed on a ship to America, transferred to a train, and delivered to a warehouse without ever opening it. This door-to-door capability eliminated the multiple handlings that had made international shipping so expensive. Shipping costs collapsed. By some estimates, containerization reduced shipping costs by 95% or more. Goods that cost $100 to ship before containers might cost $5 after. This cost reduction made international trade economically viable for ordinary consumer goods, not just luxury items. Everything became shippable. Understanding the container revolution reveals why this simple innovation was so transformative. It didn't just improve shipping, it fundamentally changed what was possible. Entire business models and global economic structures that exist today were only made possible by the shipping container. The shipping container didn't just make existing trade cheaper, it enabled entirely new forms of economic organization. Global supply chains, where products are manufactured from components made in dozens of countries, would be impossible without containerization. This reshaped the global economy. Manufacturing became geographically fragmented. Before containers, products were typically made entirely in one location because coordinating production across distances was too expensive. After containers, companies could optimize each production step separately, design in California, source materials from Brazil, manufacture components in Taiwan, assemble in China, and distribute globally. All became economically viable. The iPhone exemplifies this. It's designed in California but contains components from dozens of countries. The screen comes from Korea or Japan, processors from Taiwan, memory from various countries, rare earth elements from China, and assembly in China. The finished product ships globally. None of this would be economically possible without cheap, reliable container shipping. China became the world's factory because of containers. Cheap Chinese labor was always available, but without efficient shipping, it couldn't be accessed. Containers made it economically rational to manufacture in China and ship globally. This transformed China from a poor, isolated country to the world's second-largest economy in just decades. Just-in-time manufacturing relies on containerization. Companies can maintain minimal inventory because new supplies arrive reliably and frequently. This reduces warehousing costs and tied-up capital. The entire modern business model of lean manufacturing depends on predictable, cheap shipping that containers enable. Retail prices fell dramatically for manufactured goods. Products that once cost hundreds of dollars to ship now cost a few dollars. This reduction in logistics costs meant retail prices could fall while maintaining margins. Consumers in developed countries gained access to far more products at much lower prices. Living standards rose partly due to cheaper goods enabled by containers. Emerging economies accessed global markets. Countries could specialize in particular industries, producing for global markets rather than just domestic consumption. Bangladesh exports textiles, Vietnam electronics, and Mexico automobiles, all because container shipping makes accessing distant markets economically viable. Trade volumes exploded. Global trade has grown far faster than global GDP since containerization. Today, international trade represents a much larger share of economic activity than in the pre-container era. The global economy is vastly more integrated and interdependent because containers made such integration economically sensible. Understanding containers' role in globalization reveals that the modern globalized economy we take for granted was directly enabled by this innovation. Without containers, global supply chains, cheap consumer goods, and the international division of labor would be impossible. The economic geography of the world was rewritten by the shipping container.
The shipping container didn't just affect shipping and manufacturing, it fundamentally reshaped cities, regional economies, and real estate, creating winners and losers and altering the physical landscape of civilization. Port cities were transformed. Traditional ports required vast areas of waterfront for cargo storage and handling. Containerization reduced these space requirements dramatically. Valuable waterfront real estate previously devoted to docks and warehouses became available for redevelopment. Cities like San Francisco, London, and Sydney transformed old dock areas into residential and commercial districts. Some ports boomed while others declined. Ports that adapted early to containers prospered. Rotterdam, Singapore, and Shanghai became massive container hubs. Ports that couldn't accommodate large container ships or didn't invest in container infrastructure declined. The geography of global trade shifted based on which ports successfully transitioned. Warehouse location changed. In the break bulk era, warehouses needed to be at ports to store goods between ship and land transport. Containers enabled warehouses to move inland, where land was cheaper. Massive distribution centers now locate away from expensive coastal areas, connected to ports by rail and truck. This reshaped logistics geography. Employment patterns shifted dramatically. Port cities lost tens of thousands of longshoreman jobs as containers eliminated the need for large-scale manual labor. This devastated working-class communities built around port work. Simultaneously, new jobs emerged in trucking, rail, and warehouse operations, but often in different locations and requiring different skills. Real estate values shifted. Waterfront land once devoted to industrial port use became prime residential and commercial real estate. This gentrification transformed many port cities, sometimes displacing existing working-class communities. The economic winners from containerization included those who owned land in areas that transitioned from industrial to high-value uses. Regional economies were reshaped. Areas with competitive advantages in certain industries could specialize and export globally. The American Midwest lost manufacturing as production moved to cheaper locations accessible via container shipping. The Sun Belt gained logistics centers. China's coastal regions boomed while interior areas lagged. Containers redistributed economic activity globally. Infrastructure investment patterns changed. Countries invested billions in container port capacity, rail connections, and highway systems to handle container traffic. These investments shaped development patterns. Cities and regions with good container logistics infrastructure attracted investment and grew faster than those without. Environmental impacts concentrated.
Container shipping itself is relatively efficient per unit of cargo, but massive increases in trade volume created environmental consequences. Port areas face air pollution from ships and trucks. Communities near major logistics corridors deal with traffic and pollution. These negative externalities concentrate in particular locations. Understanding how containers transformed cities reveals that technological innovations don't just affect their immediate industry. They ripple through society, reshaping physical spaces, community structures, and economic opportunities in profound and often unexpected ways.
Today's global economy operates on foundations built by container shipping. Most people don't realize how completely the modern world depends on those metal boxes continuously moving across oceans. Understanding this dependence reveals both the system's efficiency and its vulnerabilities. Approximately 90% of global trade travels in containers. Nearly everything you own probably spent time in a container: clothes, electronics, furniture, toys, and even food. The scale is staggering. Over 200 million container journeys occur annually, moving trillions of dollars in goods. Container ships have become massive. The largest container ships now carry over 24,000 containers, each 20 feet long. These megaships are engineering marvels, nearly 400 meters long as the Empire State Building is tall. Their size creates economies of scale that drive shipping costs even lower. Supply chains are optimized for just-in-time delivery. Retailers like Walmart maintain minimal inventory, relying on continuous container shipments to restock. If container shipping stopped, store shelves would empty within days. The modern retail model depends completely on container reliability. The pandemic exposed this dependency. COVID-19 disrupted container shipping through port closures, labor shortages, and demand shifts. Container shortages developed, shipping costs spiked tenfold, and store shelves emptied. Products couldn't reach consumers despite being manufactured. The vulnerability of container-dependent supply chains became painfully obvious. Logistics companies dominate modern business. Container shipping enabled companies like Amazon that are essentially logistics operations. Amazon's core competency isn't retail, it's moving products efficiently from manufacturers to consumers using container-based supply chains. Modern e-commerce exists because containers make global logistics cheap. Economic power shifted to logistics hubs. Singapore, Dubai, and Rotterdam are major economic centers, partly because they're strategic container hubs. Control of logistics infrastructure provides economic leverage. China's Belt and Road Initiative is partly about controlling container infrastructure to enhance geopolitical power. Prices depend on container availability. When containers are scarce, costs spike, inflating prices. When abundant, prices fall. Container availability and shipping costs significantly affect inflation and economic conditions globally. Central banks must consider container shipping conditions when setting monetary policy. Environmental considerations are growing. Container shipping emits significant greenhouse gases. Ships burn heavy fuel oil, one of the dirtiest fuels. As climate concerns intensify, pressure grows to make container shipping greener. This could increase costs, affecting the economics that have driven globalization. Understanding the modern economy's container dependence reveals how invisible infrastructure shapes everything. People see products on shelves, not the container journey that brought them there. Yet that journey determines what's available, at what price, and when. The global economy runs on a foundation of metal boxes few people think about. The shipping container revolutionized global trade, but the revolution continues. New technologies, environmental pressures, and geopolitical shifts are transforming how containers shape the global economy. Understanding these trends reveals what the future might hold.
Automation is transforming ports. Rotterdam and Singapore operate largely automated ports where cranes and vehicles move containers without human operators. This increases efficiency and reduces costs, but further eliminates jobs. The port of the future might operate with minimal human presence. Blockchain and digital tracking are improving logistics. Traditionally, containers were tracked through paper documentation that could be lost or forged. Blockchain creates digital records that track containers precisely through the supply chain. This reduces fraud, improves efficiency, and enables better supply chain management. Electrification and clean fuels are being explored. Pressure to reduce emissions is pushing development of electric container ships, hydrogen-powered vessels, or ships using cleaner fuels. These technologies are still emerging, but could transform the industry. However, higher costs might reduce some economic advantages that made globalization so extensive. Reshoring and regionalization trends may limit container growth. COVID-19 exposed supply chain vulnerabilities, prompting some companies to bring manufacturing closer to consumers. Trade tensions between the U.S. and China encourage regional supply chains. These trends might slow or reverse some globalization, reducing container trade growth. Megaships face infrastructure limits. The largest ships can't fit through the Panama Canal or access many ports. Infrastructure investments are needed to handle them. Some analysts question whether ever larger ships make sense or if we've reached practical limits. 3D printing and local manufacturing could reduce shipping needs. If products can be manufactured locally from digital files rather than shipped globally, container demand might fall. This transformation is still far off, but could fundamentally change trade patterns over decades. Climate change poses physical risks. Rising sea levels threaten port infrastructure. Changing weather patterns affect shipping routes and schedules. Adapting ports and shipping to climate change will require massive investments. Climate impacts could reshape trade geography. Geopolitical fragmentation might create competing systems. If the world divides into competing blocks with limited trade between them, container trade could fragment. A U.S.-aligned system and a China-aligned system with less interaction would reduce the unified global market containers created. Understanding the future reveals that the container revolution isn't finished. Whether trends lead to more automation and efficiency, environmental transformation, or fragmentation of the unified global system remains uncertain. But the container's fundamental importance to how the world works will continue.
We've explored why the shipping container is arguably the most important invention of the modern era. The pre-container world was chaotic and inefficient, with shipping costs so high they limited trade. The simple innovation of standardized boxes that could transfer between ships, trucks, and trains reduced costs by over 90%, making global trade economically viable. Containers enabled globalization and global supply chains that define the modern economy. They transformed cities, reshaping waterfronts and regional economies. Today's world depends completely on container shipping. It's the invisible foundation of modern life. The future holds further transformation through automation, environmental pressures, and geopolitical shifts. The container seems boring, just a metal box, but judging inventions by excitement rather than impact misses what matters. The container transformed human civilization more profoundly than flashier technologies. It made the modern global economy possible, lifted billions from poverty by enabling development, and delivered unprecedented material abundance to consumers. This story reminds us that transformative innovations often aren't obvious or glamorous. Simple solutions to practical problems can reshape the world. The entrepreneur who looks at broken systems and asks, "There must be a better way," can change history.
Malcolm McLean didn't invent new technology. He just thought differently about organizing existing capabilities. Now I want to hear from you. Were you surprised to learn how important shipping containers are? Can you think of other boring innovations that profoundly changed the world? Do you think globalization enabled by containers has been good or bad overall? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this exploration eye-opening, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with anyone who wants to understand how the modern world really works. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you never miss our deep dives into technology, economics, and innovation. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.